Welcome to the next in a series of interviews we're conducting with researchers from RTPI accredited planning schools about the various projects they're involved in and why they're important to the planning profession. This episode features Matluba Khan, lecturer in urban design at Cardiff University, Tom Smith, senior lecturer in human geography at Cardiff University, and Neil Harris, senior lecturer in statutory planning at Cardiff University. Matluba, Tom and Neil will be discussing their research project entitled A Grange Town to Grow Up In, Developing a Children and Young People's Recovery Plan. The research focuses on the ways in which children and young people can plan for their own neighbourhoods. And Matluba, Tom and Neil were good enough to answer a few questions that I hope will help us understand a bit more about the project and its importance to the planning profession and to wider society. The questions appear in writing throughout the interview, followed by Matluba, Tom and Neil's verbal responses. For further information about this project, please visit the RTPI's Planning Research Matters Hub or email research@rtpi.org.uk.
The aim of our project was to develop a place-specific COVID recovery plan for a neighborhood by engaging with children and young people. Consulting children and young people in design and planning is not new. However, it doesn't happen as widely as one would expect. In many instances, when children's views are asked, the consultation remains tokenistic and rarely fits into plans and policies. What is unique about this project is that it aims to create a place-specific recovery plan in the aftermath of the pandemic. The COVID recovery plan created through this project is not only a list of ideas that children wanted, but shows where in their local area children would like to make changes and when those changes should happen. The ideas were also generated through engaging with their surrounding places, identifying what works and what doesn't work for children and young people at the moment. We think planning professionals can learn through how we engaged children. We used a series of workshops in schools and community centers, and we used different creative approaches like drawings, map making, model making, visits to local sites with children to find out how children felt about their area and to give them different ways to express the changes they wanted.
For a city to be inclusive, it is absolutely essential for planners to understand children's lived experiences. A city, as seen through the eyes of children, is different from how adults see and experience a city. Children's needs and preferences of places in their neighbourhoods are not the same as adults, and to plan a city that is inclusive and friendly to children and young people, the planners must have an understanding of children's lived experiences and their needs and preferences. We know, for example, that children might find some green spaces like parks, which adults might generally like, as boring, too open and expansive, and maybe lacking the facilities that they want to enjoy in those spaces. Older children often highlight the lack of social spaces available for them or report experience of conflict with other users, something which we often report conflict with young people, but actually finding that young people similarly report conflict in some of these spaces is really interesting. Ultimately, cities and urban spaces are designed by and for adults and not usually for children. And it is important for planners to hear children's voices and needs and plan for these. We need to think carefully how we design plan making and consultation processes and ask ourselves whether these are designed in a way that children and young people can get involved in.
So we know more generally that children's right to participate is mandated, if you like, by the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. And also significantly, Wales is the first country in the UK to embed those principles in legislation. So whilst we know that planning policy in Wales puts an emphasis on good design and making provisions to meet the needs of everyone, including children and young people, there's no specific mention in planning policy in Wales of children's participation in itself, or advice on how it should be done. So as part of the general picture, more broadly than the community that we've been working in, on the one hand, the commitment internationally and very specifically in Wales is there for children to participate in the planning system, but the practical implementation of how children and young people can actually participate, i.e. how do they practically do it, that's not been fully embedded yet. So children are not really having opportunities to make their voices heard in the planning system, not just in Cardiff and in the community we've been working in, but more broadly too. Another side to this, though, is that public participation more generally is really challenging for planning authorities, and even more so with children who perhaps don't have the same opportunities or the same knowledge to fully engage with public participation. It takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of time to do participation with children, both for the planners and for the children themselves. Children often have busy schedules, they're at school, they might do other activities, they're seeing family and friends. It can be really difficult to find time for those children to engage in the kinds of participation that we're talking about. And there can be real difficulties with reaching some children to ensure full representation of children and young people. And our project's shown that it's really possible to reach a diversity of children in this particular community, but this takes time, it takes commitment, and it takes a diversity of forms of expression to allow children to express their views and put them forward. And again, these are not necessarily methods that planners will be trained in to do.
Drawing from our research, a children and young people's plan for Grangetown is being developed as part of the project, and we are going to launch this in February 2023. A toolkit is also being developed to engage children and young people in the plan making process. So our primary audience for the toolkit is planners. However, this can also be used by play workers, teachers, and anyone else who might want to participate with children and young people to design and plan. This toolkit that we are developing can be used in any neighborhood and in both urban and rural contexts for gaining an understanding of children's lives, how children assess their current neighborhood, and how they would like to see it improved. The toolkit may also be used for improving an existing neighborhood or developing a plan for a new neighborhood or city. This can also be used as a teaching exercise to engage children and young people in planning and design.
This is ultimately our goal, is get planning practitioners to create better places, better plans that generate communities that are better for children and young people. We spoke to some local planners during our project working in Cardiff who were trying, in parallel to our project, to work out ways of engaging children and young people in placemaking and plan making. We think our toolkit will provide planners with a series of off-the-peg, accessible methods for helping children and young people express how they feel about where they live and what they would like to see changed. The toolkit can help with techniques for evaluating places, generating creative ideas for change, and working through priorities for change over time. Plans that better reflect children and young people's ideas are simply better plans, and better plans can allow us to build communities and places that we're proud to grow up in.
First of all, we hope that one of the primary outcomes of this research is a greater awareness and understanding amongst planners, planning professionals about children and young people's rights to participate in designing and planning their city, to take seriously the role that children and young people should play in designing places. Second, we hope at a smaller scale that there'll be some action on the part of planners and designers and policymakers to embed children's participation in planning and urban design. And we've been very lucky to be working with a team at Cardiff Council who are very committed to engaging children and young people more and thinking about how they embed children's participation in the longer term. And then finally, we're hoping for some direct action to implement some of the ideas that children have put forward in the plan that we've developed with them for local development, which have been co-created by the children and young people themselves as part of this project. Now, these are reasonably small scale because our project itself is quite small, but we're hoping again with the help of the council and with young people themselves to be able to implement one or two of the small ideas that children have had.
As Tom mentioned, the first next step from this project is to explore opportunities to implement two ideas generated during the course of the workshop with the children. So we will be working with the child-friendly Cardiff team to implement these ideas because we feel it's really important for children and young people who participated to see the change is happening based on their participation. And secondly, we would be collaborating with Cardiff Council and other local authorities for testing this planning process in other areas of Cardiff and rolling this out more widely across Wales.